May I please have George and Andrea head to the stage? George Barakis is the co-founder of Climate Solutions Fund. Andrea Yosampa is the CEO of Deploy US. Come on up. And these two brilliant people are going to talk about building towards bipartisan solutions, and nothing makes my heart sing than knowing that they think we're going to do this. I say go for it. You have my full support and undivided attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I heard this on the last session, but we are truly the last thing between you and lunch. But we're hoping that we're going to get started right away, but we're hoping that we're going to leave you a lot to think about, and you won't actually be thinking about lunch after this session. But I want to start by thanking the Volo Foundation and the entire Volo team, Thais, David, Nicole, Wendy, and everyone else for their hard work putting together this wonderful event, and also for generously offering me and Andrea a spot on the stage to discuss a topic which is very important in this moment. My name is George Barakis. I'm the co-founder of the Climate Solutions Fund. We're an education and advocacy organization working with right-of-center stakeholders to try and generate more conservative support for climate action in support of bipartisan solutions. I also serve as president of another group, Young Conservatives for Carbon Dividends, where we are mobilizing young Republican voices in support of carbon pricing policies. As Caroline mentioned, the topic for this session is building towards bipartisan solutions, and I think this is really the critical central issue that the climate movement has to confront in this new political environment. There are certainly many lessons to be learned from the 2024 election, but I think one of the most important is just how central bipartisan support is for durable and long-lasting policy change. As we all know, American politics is in a constant state of flux. One-party rule of Washington is actually quite rare, and because of how divided our country is, it doesn't last very long. It tends not to last very long. And we've been treated to a vivid example of this. Just think 2 years ago, we had unified Democratic control of Washington under President Biden. We passed a major climate bill and a number of other things. And now, 2 years on, we have unified Republican control of Washington under President Trump. Certainly a huge shift. So why does that matter for climate? Well, the uncomfortable truth is that right now, we're not currently winning the battle. If you accept even the rosiest projections for the build-out of clean energy and implementation of the IRA, and some of them are quite rosy, the US and the world are still significantly off track from meeting our science-based targets for reduction of emissions. And so we need a full-on sprint to even have a chance of meeting those climate goals for both 2030 and 2050. And as a result, we don't have the luxury of waiting for ideal political outcomes or ideal election results or ideal candidates to win. If you look at historical trends, the Democratic Party controlling all of the levers of power in Washington is actually quite rare. It happens only once every 14 years. Therefore, at this moment, waiting for the next time for that to happen and relying solely on Democratic votes for continued climate progress, I would say would be a strategic misstep. The very simple but critical reality to accept, I think, is that in order to move at the scale and speed that the climate crisis demands that we move, building greater right-of-center support for action and for policies is a genuine imperative. It's not a nice-to-have, but a must-have. And if you need any example that this is the case, just look at the high-stakes battles that are going on right now on Capitol Hill around the IRA and other policies. It could be Republican votes that ultimately make the difference and decide whether those policies survive another 4 years. And so I'm really excited to actually be here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Andrea Yosampa. to discuss all of this. Andrea is the CEO of an organization called Deploy US, which is the only climate and energy organization in the country that's working to empower the full civil society ecosystem of conservatives and right-of-center stakeholders working on this issue. And Deploy supports them with funding, coordination, and infrastructure to drive greater right-of-center interest in this issue in support of bipartisan climate wins. And I'm excited because the work that Andrea and Deploy US are doing is truly innovative and cutting edge. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So as an initial question, Andrea, I think based on my sort of opening remarks, I think many people are wondering, what is the pathway to greater right-of-center and bipartisan climate action in this new political environment? And what is Deploy US doing to unlock that?
Thanks so much, George, and thank you. I add my thanks to David, Thais, Wendy, Nicole, and team for inviting such a vitally important but often provocative conversation in this context, and to all of you for your participation in it. So I think the question that you didn't ask, which I'll start with, is this possible? And the answer, the answer is unequivocally. Can we sit back and optimistically expect that everything is going to be fine? No. Do we have in this room agency to make a tremendous difference in terms of what happens over the next 4 years and beyond on climate and clean energy? Yes. And that leverage includes opportunities for action that even the deepest experts in climate often are not aware of. And the reason for this is that if we think about democratic leadership on climate, and by the way, climate change and clean energy have become misbranded over the years as a left-of-center issue alone. Inherently, the issue issue itself on its merits is actually a very good fit for what people care about, both left of center and right of center. But it's become misbranded, and Democrats have been leading on the issue. And they've been leading on the issue in no small part because of the environmental movement, which demands action on climate change, but not only pushes for it and requires it, really assists with the flow of talent to key offices in Washington, D.C. and around the country, with talking points, with credibly researched data, with amplification in all of the media that matters left of center. So the environmental movement has, we say, pushed, pulled, and equipped Democratic lawmakers to exercise leadership on this issue. And let's look at right of center. Republican policymakers do not have that ecosystem. They do not have robust pressure or validation in conservative media, or celebration or support with talent pipelines, with research, with talking points, et cetera, to exercise sufficiently ambitious leadership on climate change. And they haven't for years. The really good news, and this gets back to agency and opportunity, is that we have in this country an ecosystem of civil society leaders, nonprofit organizations, 501c3, C4, and beyond, that are credible on the political right, that care passionately about advancing climate action. And the organization that George and his colleagues run, Climate Solutions Fund, is one exemplar of that. That ecosystem includes two kind of categories of organizations. So some of these are by conservatives for conservatives. They're founded by conservative youth, conservative former members of Congress, conservative influential leaders, focused on climate and clean energy and policy solutions. They work credibly with Republican policymakers, they work with Republican constituencies, and they have not only the messages that can be effective right of center, and this is so crucial right now, they are the messengers who are trusted to have this conversation right of center. So there's the conservative climate forward groups, as well as groups we call allies. So these allies do not self-identify or brand as conservative. They're nonpartisan. But they engage the constituencies that really matter on the political right to advance this conversation and action. So business leaders, investors, military officers, national security leaders, conservative religious leaders, and beyond. This ecosystem is about 24 organizations strong and growing. It's small, and it's nowhere near the power of the environmental left. So what the organization that I founded and run, Deploy US, does, we are built specifically to increase the power and impact of this ecosystem to make sure that Republican policymakers in DC, in Florida, and many other places around the country have trusted, conservative, and credible right-of-center voices requiring and helping them to exercise increasingly ambitious and effective leadership on climate change and clean energy. And I'll just say one more thing about Deploy that I think is going to be interesting and relevant to this group. We are not a conservative organization. We're an intentionally bipartisan organization. Our staff of just 13 people goes from quite progressive to quite conservative. Our board of directors goes from quite progressive to quite conservative. We are united in our commitment to US leadership on climate change, and we share that commitment. So our whole makeup, our purpose is bipartisan, but our strategy is focused right of center because that's where the most crucial need is. Certainly in this political moment, but in terms of ensuring the kind of long-term, enduring bipartisan support that's going to carry us forward to success if we invest in it.
Thank you for that overview. Thank you. Absolutely. I want to drill down a little bit into something you were getting into right in the end there, which is the bipartisan ethos of Deploy US, and to talk a little bit about your own journey going from, you have a very interesting background, Andrea, in international peace building and international negotiation. How did you go from that to founding Deploy US, helping empower right-of-center constituencies to engage on climate? I think that this audience would be very interested to hear that story, if you could.
So it's a longer story than I will share here, so you can grab me another time. But in a nutshell, 10 years ago, so Deploy US shares a 10-year anniversary right now with Volo. And 10 years ago, when my now 18-year-old son was 8, I was sitting reading him a story. And somehow in that story, climate change came up in our conversation. And I decided in that moment, I sort of had that moment of reflection. I had worked on this issue prior, so it wasn't new to me. But my career had ended up focusing on international conflict and peace. And in that moment, just out of recognition that and I'll say everyone in this room, has this incredible good fortune to decide where we put our life energy and what we do for our work. I decided that the issue mattered too much to me not to pivot back to my roots working on this issue. But I also saw, as I really thought about making a personally high-stakes pivot with a young child and a mortgage and all of the responsibilities of adulthood, I looked around and I saw how many talented people were working on this issue, how much money was being invested, not enough, but still real dollars, how much effort, and that we had not achieved success. And I was really clear in my own mind that I wanted to be sure that where I would put my energy and my effort had a real possibility of having impact beyond the margins. So I did, with my family's support, I took 6 months and I did a self-financed, very robust landscape analysis 10 years ago, in which I talked to this incredible array of leaders, basically anyone who touched climate or clean energy as a business leader, investor, entrepreneur, innovator, military officer, policymaker, religious leader, academics, activists, and I talked with these incredible leaders, just trying to answer one question for myself. This was never published. And the question was, where is the leverage? Where is the leverage that really has the potential to unlock global decarbonization? And even though my whole life and career had been focused internationally, I got very quickly pointed back in this landscape analysis to the US and to two things. One, to policy really mattering, that innovation, bringing clean energy online, for example, was really dependent on having a conducive policy context, both in states and at the federal level. And I had come from the left of center environmental movement way back in my history. I mean, I come from a Boston-based progressive Jewish background. And so in this analysis, what I learned was that the environmental movement, to some extent, it had its head in the sand, thinking that there could be pathways to enduring success without a measure of authentic leadership and engagement across the political spectrum. And finally, I discovered that it was actually possible because I began to identify these groups, these organizations, which were punching way above their weight, engaging in this conversation with policymakers. It was just such a small, nascent, and underfunded ecosystem that it wasn't able to achieve the results at scale that were needed. But I identified this possibility, and that was the heart 10 years ago of launching this organization, which is purpose-built to solve this problem. And thank goodness we have put the foundations in place, including through the kind of relationships that our organizations have, because we're not starting from scratch right now.
We're here thanks to the Volo Foundation, a philanthropic institution, and I want to talk a little bit about the role that philanthropy plays. Volo has, I think, occupies a unique position in this moment in that they have and they are empowering an array of constituencies, including organizations like mine that are working right of center because they recognize that leverage and the need to engage to build a broader tent. Can you talk briefly about the role that philanthropy has to play in helping bridge the partisan divide on this issue and where the opportunity is for philanthropy to do that?
So this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I think that our biggest opportunity right now is bringing more philanthropic attention and investment to this ecosystem. I think that is the biggest lever for climate philanthropy right now, is investing in truly bipartisan climate engagement. We heard the data point about insufficient funding flowing to climate. Well, within the funding that flows to climate, less than 1% of those climate philanthropic dollars have flowed to the organizations that are passionately committed to climate solutions and able to engage credibly right of center. Less than 1% of climate philanthropy, which means that climate philanthropy has inadvertently been fueling the partisan divide on this issue, but by not investing in the combination of voices and activities that can establish the enduring bipartisan support for action. So it is, you mentioned Volo, and I really, this is not like gratuitous, this is authentic. There are not sufficient funders who understand the importance of this and are playing the leadership role to invest in this space. It's starting to change, but I really want to acknowledge that leadership because it is so, so important. The final thing I'll say is that this is the ecosystem that we exist to support of these several dozen organizations. I mentioned punches way above its weight, and I want to give just one data point. So Deploy US supports work in DC, but also in key states across the country, and our deepest work to date has been in Florida. And the person who has led that, together with a number of George's colleagues, is Terry Gibson, my colleague sitting right here. You can grab him later, I encourage you to do so. And in Florida, we invested over 2 years $3.2 million. That was in a combination of grants to our partners and staff, like our own costs. With that $3.2 million, we generated conservatively assessed, and we pressure tested this to the hilt, $7.1 billion in government investment combined with projected private sector associated investment in water-related technology that advances decarbonization, which equates, again, with the most conservative assessment to, I think is it 7,000x? Is that the right number?
Probably.
Okay, so...
Not a math guy,
okay,
Andrea.
Okay, so I'm going to embarrass myself in front of David because I don't hold these numbers well, so if I got... Anyhow, I will double check that, David. But the ROI on these right-of-center investments toward bipartisan outcomes is off the charts. And so I really look forward to engaging in conversations, certainly with a little bit of Q&A right now, but off of this stage about where and how philanthropy can invest to really drive the leadership on this issue right of center and across the aisle right now over the next 4 years and beyond.
And I will just add on that, I think it's important to remember that when we're talking about empowering groups working right of center on climate, that if we don't empower those groups, it just leaves a huge void that the opportunists and the political players who are able to exploit that to promote denial, delay, misinformation. So empowering organizations like my own and the other organizations that deploy U.S. supports is absolutely critical to overcoming the disinformation machine that's come to sort of define our politics on this issue. Can we get a couple quick, no questions? Well, then you'll have to find us after. I'm sorry to say, I know we're running a little behind here, but.
Stay right there.
Okay. Yes, please. No.
She's asking us to sit here so that you can come
yes.
crowd us with questions, which we're delighted to do.
Absolutely. And I want to just thank again Volo and all of you for being here and engaging in this conversation with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Can I thank you for what you're doing? Really.